G. Rose, and today I'm going to be talking about the value theory of digital assets, commons, and investment, which has been featured over at Intrinsic Macro, which is run by Anthony Morley, and I love Anthony. He is just a brilliant thinker, a wonderfully kind individual, very thoughtful, and he is doing work at Intrinsic Macro that is extremely important. I've learned a lot from him. I've benefited greatly from his thinking. He recently put out a book on Leibniz that I think everyone needs to read. I've had the pleasure of reading it. I've enjoyed it very much. It really opened up Leibniz for me in ways that had before evaded me, and I'm in Anthony's debt for that. Again, Intrinsic Macro is a tremendous Substack. I highly suggest you subscribe to it, and I highly suggest you review his thinking. He is taking on very serious problems in regarding how exactly we price digital assets, how exactly should we think about a digital economy, what are the problems with the advertisement model in regard to pricing and raising funds for digital assets, and how might we reapproach pricing digital assets in a manner that actually can help unlock what, in my opinion, should be central to economics. And that would be a focus on value itself, not merely price, what arises to value, and how exactly to give rise to a form of motivation that I believe would have radical socioeconomic impacts, that being intrinsic motivation over just extrinsic motivation. Not because extrinsic motivation is always bad, but if that's the only form of motivation we have, then we will not be tapping into the value creation that we could tap into if we were to tap into intrinsic motivation. And the work that Anthony is doing could help finance intrinsic motivation, price intrinsic motivation, and locate sources of value that other people should look into so that they themselves may benefit from that value and consequently develop their own intrinsic motivation as a result. Again, the work at Intrinsic Macro is extraordinary, and I was honored to be featured over there, and you can find links to the articles that were posted in a 7-part series over at Intrinsic Macro. This is an audio summary of some of the ideas that can be found in that paper at Intrinsic Macro, and please do subscribe to Intrinsic Macro today. And this paper is going to be exploring the possibility. Well, first off, it's going to be exploring the need for a way to value, distribute, invest in digital assets, such as products that are made online, lectures, any of the things that you can find online, data in general. Right now we have an issue of figuring out how to value data. And in the analog world, or the real world, we basically use the price mechanism to send signals on what is valuable, what resources should be distributed where. For example, if the price of water drops like a rock in Florida, they'll stop sending water to Florida because there won't be the opportunity for the profit. Whereas if the cost of water in, say, Maine were to go up, people will send water there, which would bring the price down because there's a profit to be made. So prices, the price mechanism sends signals, it sends information, and it's a very powerful sorter of organization. Also, too, it gives people reason to believe they have an idea of the value of something. If you see that water is worth $10 in Florida, you would have reason to think that water is uniquely valuable in Florida, where in New York, perhaps, where it's worth $2, you would say, well, it's not as valuable in New York as in Florida. Now, none of that necessarily follows. Price does not necessarily equal value, and we have to understand there are distinctions between price and value. But price gives us reason to think one way or another. And also, a price is not merely subjectively bound, because everyone in the community sees the price of water in Florida being $10 and $2 in New York, and the community will organize as such around that assessment. Maybe they'll disagree, maybe they'll agree. If they disagree, they won't buy it at that price. If they agree, they will buy it at that price, and so on and so forth. So prices create information, they help us distribute resources, and they help create a foundation for communal action and a foundation for that communal action. So price is really important. Also, If the people around us are buying the water, that tells us that maybe it's worth getting because the people who are part of the same communal life as we are buying the water, so maybe we should. It would also suggest that they're contributing to the water market or whatever they're investing in, and that's going to send a certain kind of information. And this is going to be high quality information because they have to use their money to participate, and money is very powerful. Lorenzo does this great work on getting people to take bets on if conspiracy theories they believe in are true or not. And in his research, his idea is that skin in the game is one of the few things that's more powerful than self-deception. When you force people to put money down on what they believe, they start to really think about it, and they become much more aware of any of the pitfalls they may have in their theory and so on and so forth. Money has a way of making people be notably more critical and to do their best to avoid rationalization. Now, of course, not perfectly. Nothing is perfect. But money seems to be unique in its ability to get people to enter into critical reasoning. And we seem to have a sense of that because once we learn that someone has invested $1,000 into a building project, we tend to assume that means that they take it very seriously, that they're very genuine. Someone puts $1,000 down, that means something. That says something. Whereas if somebody says, "Oh, I really like this new project," and doesn't do anything, they just say they like the new project, well, that doesn't mean they're lying. That doesn't mean what they're saying is false. But when a person puts money down, it sends a stronger signal. It says... even if the person is wrong and the project ends up not being worth anything, it's hard to doubt that the person themselves was genuine in that assessment. If they put $1,000 in, there's really good reason to believe that they believed in the project, even if they were ultimately wrong. So investment, money, these all have a way to help us have a sense of what's going on in the heads of the people around us, which we can never fully access. But it gives us a ground for trust. It gives us a ground for supposing some information is of a higher quality than other information. It does a lot. It sends a lot of powerful signals which again, following Friedrich Hayek, is one of the reasons why I think the price mechanism is so powerful. It's not merely about making profits, but about sorting and organizing information. Now, the value theory, I should note, the title is alluding to the general theory by Lord Keynes, which was written about 100 years ago, which... It's an entirely different paper, but Keynes basically seems to have argued that capitalism did not work on its own, that its ability to operate was contingent. It was not a self-optimizing machine. There had to be certain mechanisms that were managed manually to make sure the system did not eventually fall below what I call a demand event horizon, from which it could not necessarily recover on its own, except after an incredible long period of time, if even then. Well, in a similar way, I think the value theory of digital assets wants to argue that the traditional price mechanism, which we get from Hayek, or which Hayek argues for, works very, very well with analog entities, with things in the real world, but it is not proven. It is not proven to work when it comes to digital assets, the online world, because there's no mechanism to make it readily apply. And instead, what we're doing is we're using it for an advertisement-based structure, which is actually leading ultimately to a race to the bottom. Now, that's an extensive argument. Anthony at Intrinsic Research will make that argument quite powerfully. I highly suggest you give it a look. But what is explored is the possibility of non-fungible tokens potentially creating a new way to organize digital assets, to distribute and invest in digital assets, without which we're going to be in trouble because we need a method of investment. There's a few things that investment does. Again, it brackets the range of interpretations. If someone invests $1,000 into a building project, then it's hard to interpret that action as meaning they don't care of the building project, or to interpret what they're doing as them simply acting like they care about the building project. Well, they must really believe in it, in the same way that if you could invest say into a digital asset, that would say that you don't merely like it, you give your thumbs up, you drop your comment on the YouTube video, but investment, that would suggest that you really, really believe in it. And now, of course, I know there's Patreon and these different charity models, but the meaning of charity is not as bracketed as investment, and also charity can feel kind of like a one and done. Whereas investment, if you put $1,000, you gain from your investment if the product does well. So you're there for the long haul. There's more of a relationship. And the more people that do that, the more reason there will be to think that this investment will generate a return and that it is a good investment, and so on and so forth. Another way to put all this is, strange enough, there's not really a great mechanism of word of mouth reviews online. That might sound very strange. But, if someone comes up to you and they say, oh, this restaurant was really good, and they spent money on it, and you also just know that they're going to be, they're your neighbor, you're going to see them again, that there's a good chance that they wouldn't be telling you that unless there was reason to think that it really was a good restaurant. They know it's going to cost you money to go, and they know that if you don't like it, you're going to let them know, and you might even be upset because you spent your money on it. So there's reason to think people take word of mouth advice much more seriously than something they see on the television, because they know there's a certain communal relationship, a certain common ground that is shared that makes that information more likely to be true, more likely to be reliable, because there's investment. And really what ends up happening is that economics, price mechanisms, and the existence of commons are all very tied together. And if we want to have the possibility of a global commons, or a common life, a common space of which is grounded on digital assets or the online world, we're going to need a mechanism of investment to communicate reason to trust, and to communicate the idea that people are taking this seriously, like truly seriously, to the point where they're putting skin in the game, where they could lose because of it. That situation will give us reason to trust in the commons, and to ourselves take risk in its name to make it possible to invest in it. If this doesn't occur, if you don't get this sorting mechanism of information that would give you reason to trust, well, right now the internet is practically infinite. It's not technically infinite. Arguably nothing is technically infinite, but it's practically infinite. And it's very difficult to organize what information is valuable and what is not. You have some curators, you have some people who tell you it's good, but it's an imperfect mechanism. Investment, though, is strong. It's strong advice. If you see Apple or Tesla or different stocks that are at a very high valuation, then that communicates, rightly or wrongly, that there's real value here. It's very difficult to get that kind of signaling right now involving the internet, because you don't have an investment or price mechanism. The paper is going to explore a lot more ways that NFTs, non-fungible tokens, might be able to solve this problem of digital assets lacking distribution or investment or grounds for trust. And if that was solved, it could be possible to establish a global commons. I mean, there are other things too. If I'm invested, we all feel like we're behind on watching all the YouTube videos we want to watch, on commenting on all the things that our friends are doing. We always feel like we're kind of behind. It's very difficult to keep up. There's so much new material. But if I could say invest $1,000 in Dawood or Johannes or Bernard or Cadell or Bart or any of these different people, then even if I fall behind because, I have to go to work, I have to clean the kitchen, cut the grass, whatever, if I fall behind on watching their material, the investment itself is going to send a signal that I care about what they're doing, that there is value here. Kind of a problem now is the only way to really communicate that you're invested is to watch the thing and to leave a comment, say if we're just using YouTube as an example, which I can only do so much of because of finitude itself, because of certain temporal limitations. Investment could fill the gap, if you will, to communicate attention when I am not able to actually give attention because of all of the responsibilities I have in life. So investment could fill that problem. Now, again, a problem with investment can be, well, if I give you $1,000, doesn't that kind of give me a kind of power over you? Well, that can happen, but that's why when you have a commons, if we're all part of the same community and we're invested together, then the likelihood of the investment being used in a power dynamic is much less, because I have to live with you, because I have to be around you, I have to continue to incorporate you into my daily life. So the shared commons can have a positive impact of lowering the likelihood that investment is used in a power dynamic. Investment also can help me focus on things I have control on things that, right now you can feel like you have to keep up with everything going on planet Earth, or you're falling behind, you're kind of
your attention is attracted toward the big system issues. For good reason. I mean, these things, if the Federal Reserve messes up their inflation policy, if international relations between China and America fall out, if something happens with the Navy operations, Australia and New Zealand and so on, well, that can have a really big impact on your life, on your daily life. And so there's reason to be concerned about these things because it affects the stock market if you're invested in that, or the bond market and so on. Well, this would create a way to invest in things that you actually and can make money off of through that investment, on things that you have, what the paper will say, a chance to not just determine coherence about, but also correspondence with, because you can actually gather a full amount of information. You really can't, unless you're part of the U.S. government, know everything you need to know about American-Chinese relationships unless you're part of the government. But in regard to, say, Cadell Last's YouTube channel or his work or so on, it's possible to really be up to date on that and to really be part of it and to feel like you have a good hold on it, and therefore for it not to be alienated. So you can start directing investment toward things that actually feel within your grasp, per se, rather than things that are kind of over you. And that's positive, because I think when the paper's going to talk about large system abstractions, LSAs, or when you live in a globalized world, so much of your attention is toward these large system abstractions, and that if that's all you've got, it can be existentially overwhelming. And this is described also in the paper on the grand technology. So we need some balance, and it's very possible that NFTs could contribute toward arriving at that balance that we need. Now, again, I'm not necessarily an NFT enthusiast. I don't have any NFTs, but I can see where this technology might be able to contribute to solving price mechanism problems with digital assets, and perhaps contribute toward a global commons. But it's going to depend on how we use the technology. It can help us gain high quality information versus just low quality information. It can help us focus on things that we can have correspondence and coherence regarding. It can also help us overcome problems of having finite focus and never being able to give attention to everything we want to give attention to. And it could also overcome some of the shortcomings of charity models, such as we see with Patron and things like that. Not necessarily. Again, NFTs are right now seemingly mostly being used for speculative markets, which is problematic, but the counter to that would be that most technologies, when they're first introduced, go through a kind of crazy period. And maybe that's all NFTs is going through. Again, maybe not. Maybe it will ultimately not prove to be used in the way that this paper argues it potentially could be. But I think it is necessary for us to begin thinking about the need for a new value theory of digital assets, common, and investment. The particular details of how NFTs could contribute to the solutions, could help solve the problems this paper have outlined, is going to be found over at Intrinsic Research Co., which Anthony is putting together, the Substack. You'll find a link to it in the paper, in the description. I highly suggest you go through that Substack and read the pieces. This paper has just been an overview, a more general overview on the relation between NFTs and the potential for a global commons and a communal space and new community. The technicalities of how NFTs could solve this problem are going to be found over there, and Anthony's just done an extraordinary job. So I highly suggest you give it a look. This has been OG Rose. For more by OG Rose, please visit ogrose.com, and thank you so much for your time.